All stories posted on our channel are stories from our subscribers and created by us based on real events we've experienced and witnessed. We post new stories every day for your entertainment, that we hope you enjoy them. Thank you.
The words came out of nowhere, striking with the precision of a weapon designed to inflict maximum damage. We were standing in the bedroom of our home in suburban Phoenix, the Arizona sunset bleeding through the windows in shades of orange and crimson, when my wife delivered a blow that would change everything. My name is Sullivan. I was 43 years old, a structural engineer at a respected firm in Scottsdale, and until that Thursday evening in late September, I had believed that even struggling marriages contained some baseline of mutual respect, some floor beneath which neither partner would sink. I was wrong. "If you're so independent," Margot said, her voice dripping with a contempt I had never heard directed at, "then be intimate with your own hand. That's apparently all you're good for anyway." The words hung in the air, poisonous and irretrievable. I stood motionless, still holding the glass of water I had brought upstairs, trying to process what my wife of 16 years had just said to me. The argument had started over something trivial. It always did these days. I had mentioned that I was tired of always being the one to initiate any physical affection between, tired of the constant rejection, tired of feeling like a beggar in my own marriage. It was a conversation we had attempted multiple times over the past 2 years, always ending in her defensiveness and my resignation. But this time, something had shifted. Instead of the usual deflection, or the claims that I was being too demanding, Margot had chosen a different weapon: humiliation. "Did you just say that to me?" My voice sounded distant to my own ears, as if someone else were speaking through my mouth. "You heard me." She crossed her arms, her posture defiant rather than apologetic. "You're always complaining about not getting enough attention, about feeling rejected. Well, if you're so capable of handling everything else on your own, the bills, the repairs, the decisions, then handle that on your own too. I'm tired of being expected to perform on your schedule." Perform? The word tasted bitter. Is that what intimacy with your husband is? A performance? When it feels like an obligation, yes. When I can feel you keeping score, tracking how many days it's been, calculating when you're going to bring it up again, yes, it feels like a performance. And I'm done with it. I set down the glass of water with careful deliberation, my movements precise because my emotions were anything but. 16 years. We had been married for 16 years, had built a life together, had raised a daughter who was now 14, and navigating the complexities of high school. Through all of it, the job changes, the financial struggles of our early years, the miscarriage that had nearly broken us both, I had believed we were partners. Partners don't speak to each other the way Margot had just spoken to me. "I'm going to ask you one time," I said, my voice steadier than I felt, "to take back what you just said, to acknowledge that it was cruel and unnecessary." "I'm not taking anything back." For once I said what I actually felt instead of tiptoeing around your fragile ego. "My fragile ego." I repeated the words slowly, testing them. "Is that what you think this is about? Ego? What else would it be about? You want to feel desired, wanted, validated? It's exhausting, Sullivan. I have a demanding job. I manage this household. I deal with Iris's school drama and your mother's constant opinions. And on top of all that, I'm supposed to make sure you feel adequately appreciated in the bedroom? I don't have the energy." The itemization of her burdens was familiar. I had heard variations of this list many times before. What was new was the naked hostility, the deliberate cruelty of her initial statement, the clear intent to wound rather than communicate. "So that's it. That's how you see our marriage. A list of burdens, with me at the bottom as one more obligation you don't have energy for." "Don't be dramatic." "I'm not being dramatic. I'm finally hearing what you've apparently been thinking for a long time." I moved toward the door, needing distance, needing space to think. "I'm going to sleep in the guest room tonight." "Fine. Sulk if..." "I'm not sulking. I'm creating space so I don't say something I'll regret." I paused at the doorway, turning back to look at her. "But I want you to understand something, Margot. What you said tonight, those words, they can't be unsaid. They can't be explained away as frustration or stress. You chose to humiliate me, to reduce our intimate life to something contemptible, to suggest that my needs are so worthless that my own hand is all I deserve. You're overreacting, maybe. Or maybe I'm finally reacting appropriately to years of dismissal. I guess we'll find out." I walked down the hall to the guest room, a space that had seen occasional use by visiting relatives, but had never been my refuge from my own marriage. The bed was made with the impersonal precision of a hotel room, the pillows arranged decoratively rather than for comfort. I moved them aside, sat on the edge of the mattress, and tried to understand what had just happened. Margot and I had struggled with intimacy for years. That wasn't new. Like many marriages that had passed the decade, we had fallen into patterns that prioritized logistics over connection, efficiency over affection. I had accepted some of this as normal, had told myself that passion naturally faded and was replaced by something steadier, more companionable. But tonight had revealed something I couldn't explain away: the contempt in her voice, the deliberate cruelty of words, those weren't symptoms of a marriage in a rut. They were symptoms of something more fundamental, a complete absence of respect. I thought about Iris, our daughter, and felt a wave of gratitude that she was at a friend's house for the evening, spared from witnessing whatever this was becoming. She was a perceptive girl, had probably sensed the tension between her parents even if she couldn't name it. Children always knew more than adults gave them credit for. Sleep didn't come easily that night. I lay in the unfamiliar bed, staring at a ceiling I had painted myself 3 years ago, listening to the house settle around me. Somewhere down the hall, in the bedroom we had shared for 12 years, Margot was presumably sleeping without difficulty. Or perhaps she was also awake, replaying the conversation, maybe even recognizing that she had crossed a line. Or maybe she was satisfied, relieved to have finally said what she had been thinking. Maybe the cruelty had felt like honesty to her, like a burden lift. The thought was chilling, that my wife might feel better for having devastated me. By morning, I had reached no conclusions, but I had achieved something important, clarity about what I was feeling. Not just hurt or anger, though both were present. What I felt most acutely was the recognition that I had been living in a marriage that had ended long before tonight. I had simply been the last to realize it. The days that followed existed in a state of suspended animation. Margot and I moved through our shared home like ghosts occupying the same space without truly inhabiting it together. We exchanged necessary information about schedules and responsibility, maintained the appearance of normalcy for Iris's benefit, but the intimacy of married life, even the basic intimacy of casual conversation and shared moments, had disappeared entirely. I continued sleeping in the guest room. Margot didn't ask me to return to our bedroom, and I didn't offer. The distance felt necessary, a buffer zone that allowed me to think without the constant presence of the person who had wounded me so deeply. Work provided a welcome distraction. The engineering firm where I had spent the past 11 years was in the middle of a major commercial project, a mixed-use development in downtown Phoenix that required careful attention to load calculus and seismic consideration. I threw myself into the technical challenges with an intensity that my colleagues noticed but didn't question. "You okay?" asked Russell Brennan, my closest friend at the firm, and the only person who knew anything about my marital difficulty. We were having lunch at a food truck park near our office. The October heat still aggressive despite the approaching autumn. "I'm processing some things." "Margot?" I nodded, not trusting myself to elaborate without saying more than I intended. "You want to talk about it?" "Not yet. I'm still figuring out what there is to talk about." Russell respected my boundaries, as he always had. We had been friends since I joined the firm, had shared the particular bond that develops between people who work closely on demanding projects. He knew more about my marriage than anyone except the participants themselves, but he also knew when to push and when to let things be. "If you need anything," he said, "I'm here." "I know. Thanks." The silence at home continued through the weekend. Iris was home, which forced Margot and me to perform a version of normalcy that neither of us felt. We sat together at meals, discussed her schoolwork and social plans, functioned as parents even though our function as partners had collapsed. "Are you and Mom fighting?" Iris asked me on Sunday afternoon. We were in the garage, where I was performing maintenance on her bicycle, a task I had promised to complete weeks ago and was finally addressing. "What makes you ask that? You've been sleeping in the guest room, and you both seem really tense around." I set down the wrench I had been using, giving my daughter my full attention. She was 14, old enough to deserve honesty, but young enough that certain truths needed careful framing. "Your mom and I are having some difficulties," I admit. "We're trying to figure some things out." "Are you getting divorced?" The directness of the question startled me. "I don't know, Iris. I honestly don't know. Would you tell me if you were?" "Of course. You wouldn't hear about it secondhand. Whatever happens, you deserve to understand what's going on in your..." She was quiet for a moment, processing. "Madison's parents got divorced last year. She said it was actually better afterward. Less fighting, less tension. She sees both of them separately now, and everyone's happier. Every situation is different." "I know. I'm just saying, if that's what ends up happening, I'll be okay. I don't want you and Mom to stay together just for me if you're miserable." The maturity of her statement was simultaneously impressive and heartbreaking. At 14, she had already absorbed enough understanding of marriage and its potential failures to speak about divorce with pragmatic acceptance, rather than the devastation I might have expected. "Thank you for saying that," I said. "Whatever happens, your well-being is the most important thing to both of us." "I know." She stood up, preparing to leave. "But your well-being matters too, Dad. You seem really sad lately. I just want you to be happy." After she left, I sat in the garage for a long time, her words echoing in my mind. "You seem really sad lately." Had my unhappiness been so visible despite my attempts to maintain normalcy? Had I been radiating misery while telling myself I was managing fine? The answer, I realized, was yes. Children see what adults try to hide, perceive what we imagine we're concealing. Iris had watched her father grow increasingly unhappy and had drawn her own conclusions about the cause. That evening, I made a decision. The silence couldn't continue indefinitely. Whatever was happening between Margot and me needed to be addressed directly, even if the conversation led to conclusions neither of us wanted. I found her in the kitchen, preparing dinner with the efficient movements that characterized her approach to most tasks. We had divided household responsibilities years ago, and cooking had fallen to her, not because of gender expectations, but because she genuinely enjoyed it while I found it tedious. "We need to talk," I said. "About what?" "About us. About what happened last week. About where we go from here." Margot set down the knife she had been using, her expression guarded. "I assumed you would want to discuss it eventually. Were you planning to bring it up yourself? I was waiting to see how long you were going to sulk." "I'm not sulking. I'm trying to understand how my wife could say something so deliberately cruel and then act like nothing happened." "Nothing happened? You've been sleeping in the guest room for 5 days. You've barely spoken to me. You've created a situation where our daughter is asking about divorce." "I created this situation?" "Margot, you told me to be intimate with my own hand. You reduced our marriage to—" "I know what I said." Her voice was sharp, but also, I noticed, slightly defensive. I was frustrated. "You pushed me, and I lashed out. I pushed you by saying I was tired of being rejected, by making me feel like I'm failing at yet another thing. I already feel inadequate at work, inadequate as a mother, inadequate at managing everything I'm supposed to manage. And then you add inadequate wife to the list by constantly reminding me that I'm not meeting your physical need." The reframing was familiar. Margot was skilled at repositioning conflicts so that she became the victim rather than the aggressor. I had watched her do it many times over the had often accepted her version of events because fighting felt more exhausting than acquiescing, but not this time. "I'm going to stop you there," I said. "Because what you're doing is making this about your feelings when we need to talk about what you actually said and did. You can feel overwhelmed, stressed, inadequate. All of those feelings are valid. But feeling those things doesn't justify speaking to your partner the way you spoke to me. So I'm not allowed to have feelings? You're allowed to have feelings. You're not allowed to weaponize them. There's a difference." Margot was silent, and I watched something shift in her expression. A recognition, perhaps, that her usual tactics weren't working. When she spoke again, her voice was quieter. "What do you want from me, Sullivan? An apology? I want you to acknowledge that what you said was not just frustration. It was contempt. It was designed to humiliate me, to make me feel worthless. And until you can acknowledge that, I don't see how we move forward. And if I can't acknowledge it, if I don't see it the way you do, then we have a much bigger problem than I realize." The conversation ended there, neither of us willing to push further into territory that might prove irreversibly damaging. But something had been established. I was no longer willing to accept being treated with contempt, and Margot was not yet ready to accept that her treatment of me had been contemptuous. The impasse felt more permanent than I had anticipated, and somewhere in the back of my mind, a thought began forming that I wasn't yet ready to examine. Maybe this marriage had run its course. 2 weeks after the incident, I started therapy. The decision came not from any particular breakthrough, but from the recognition that I was drowning and needed someone to help me understand the water I was swimming in. I had spent my entire adult life solving problems through analysis and logic, professional problems, financial problems, even relationship problems. But this situation was resistant to my usual tools. Dr. Evelyn Walsh came recommended by a colleague whose own marriage had struggled and eventually improved. She was in her late 50s, with silver-streaked hair and an office decorated with abstract art that seemed designed to be open to interpretation, much like the therapeutic process itself. "Tell me why you're here," she said during our first session. "My wife told me that if I was so independent, I should be intimate with my own hand, that my needs don't matter, essentially, that I'm a burden she doesn't have energy for." How did that make you feel? Humiliated, worthless, like 16 years of marriage had been reduced to nothing. And what have you done with those feelings since? Tried to talk to her about it. She deflects, makes herself the victim, refuses to acknowledge that what she said was actually contemptuous. Dr. Walsh nodded, her expression neutral. "What I'm hearing is that you experienced a profound wound, and your attempts to address it have been unsuccessful. Is that accurate?" "Yes." "Let me ask you something. Before this incident, how would you have described your marriage?" The question forced me to think beyond the immediate crisis, to consider the longer arc of my relationship with Margot. I would have said it was struggling but salvageable, that we had drifted apart but still cared about each other, that with effort, we could reconnect. And now? Now I'm not sure there's anything to reconnect to. If my wife holds me in such contempt that she would say something like that, that those words were even possible for her, then maybe the relationship I thought we had never actually existed. That's a significant shift in perspective. It feels significant. It feels like the ground underneath me has moved. Over the following sessions, Dr. Walsh helped me explore patterns I had never examined, the ways I had accommodated Margot's needs while minimizing my own. The gradual erosion of intimacy that I had blamed on external factors, rather than recognizing as a symptom of deeper problems. The countless small dismissals I had accepted because challenging felt like too much. You've described a pattern of accommodation, Dr. Walsh observed during our third session, of putting your wife's comfort above your own needs consistently over many years. What do you think drove that pattern? I thought it was what good husbands did. Sacrifice, compromise, put the family first. Those can be healthy behaviors in balanced relationships. But what I'm hearing is that the sacrifice and compromise were largely unilateral. You giving, her taking, without equivalent reciprocation. When you put it that way, it sounds pathological. It sounds imbalanced. The question is whether the imbalance can be corrected, or whether it's so fundamental to the relationship's structure that correction isn't possible. I thought about her words for a long time after that session. Imbalanced. The word captured something I had felt for years but never named. My marriage had been imbalanced. Not in the obvious ways that would have triggered immediate recognition, but in subtle accumulations that had gradually shifted more and more weight onto my shoulders, while Margot floated above, unburdened. Meanwhile, at home, the Cold War continued. Margot had apparently decided that my refusal to accept her framing of the conflict was a sign of unreasonable stubbornness, and had retreated into a posture of wounded dignity. She moved through the house with the air of someone who had been wronged, waiting for an apology that I had no intention of offering. "This is ridiculous," she said one evening, cornering me in the kitchen while Iris was upstairs doing homework. "We've been dancing around each other for weeks. When are you going to get over this?" "Get over what exactly?" "Over one comment made in frustration. You're holding a grudge over a few words. Those few words revealed how you actually see me. That's not something I can just get over. I see you as my husband, the father of my daughter, the man I've spent 16 years building a life with, and also as someone whose needs are so unimportant that you can tell him to satisfy himself because you can't be bothered. Those things coexist in your mind, apparently. You're twisting what I said. I'm quoting what you said. Be intimate with your own hand. Those were your words, Margot. Not a paraphrase, not an interpretation. Your exact words." She had no response to that. For a moment, I saw something in her expression that might have been shame, or might have been merely the frustration of being caught in a position she couldn't argue her way out of. "What do you want?" she asked finally. "What would make this right? I want you to understand, really understand, why what you said was so damaging. Not because I explained it to you, but because you recognize it yourself. Until that happens, I don't think we can move forward. And if I can't give you that, then we have decisions to make about what kind of future we're looking at." The threat of divorce hung unspoken between us. Neither of us had named it explicitly, but it occupied the space like an unwelcome guest that everyone acknowledged but no one addressed. "I don't want to lose this marriage." Her voice softened. "Whatever you think, I do love you. I believe you love me. I'm not sure you respect me, and I'm starting to think that love without respect isn't enough." The autumn progressed, and with it came a deepening of my internal examination. Dr. Walsh had given me homework to journal about my marriage, to identify moments where I had felt respected and moments where I hadn't, to trace the trajectory of how we had arrived at this crisis. The exercise was painful, but illuminating. I discovered patterns I hadn't consciously recognized. The ways Margot had gradually assumed decision-making authority over more and more aspects of our shared life. The subtle dismissals of my opinions that had accumulated like snow until I stopped offering. The erosion of equality that had occurred so slowly I had adapted to each incremental loss. I wrote about the early years, when we had been genuinely partners, when Margot had valued my input, had wanted to know my thoughts, had treated our relationship as a collaboration rather than a hierarchy. I wrote about the middle years, when Iris was young and demanding, when we had fallen into routines that seemed efficient, but had actually been unbalanced from the start. I wrote about the recent years, when my attempts to reconnect had been met with increasing resistance, when Margot's career had consumed more and more of her energy, while my career had maintained steady importance but steady hours. The imbalance Dr. Walsh had identified became clearer with each journal entry. Margot had built a life where her needs were paramount, and mine were afterthoughts. I had enabled this by never demanding otherwise, by telling myself that accommodation was virtue, rather than recognizing it as abdication. "You're being too hard on yourself," Russell said when I shared some of these realizations. We were hiking on a Saturday morning, one of the regular excursions we had maintained over our years of friendship. Relationships are complicated. You can't assign blame in clean percentages. I'm not assigning blame. I'm recognizing patterns. I contributed to where we ended up, not by doing anything wrong, but by not doing things that needed to be done. Like what? Like standing up for myself, like insisting on respect, like recognizing that being a good husband doesn't mean disappearing into my wife's needs. So what are you going to do about it? I don't know yet, but I know that whatever comes next, I can't go back to the relationship that version of our marriage was killing something inside me. Slowly, imperceptibly, but steadily. The hiking trail wound through the desert landscape, saguaros standing sentinel against a sky that stretched forever in every direction. Arizona's stark beauty had always appealed to me. The clarity of the environment, the way survival required adaptation to harsh reality. The desert didn't accommodate weakness. It demanded strength. Maybe I needed to demand the same of my marriage. That evening, I found Margot in the living room, reading a novel with a glass of wine beside her. The scene was peaceful, domestic, the kind of moment that, from the outside, would suggest a content marriage, rather than one on the brink of collapse. Can we talk? I asked. If you're ready to move past this? Yes. I'm ready to have an honest conversation about where we are. That's not the same thing as moving past it. Margot set down her book, her expression wary. What kind of honest conversation? One where we both acknowledge our contributions to where we are. One where you recognize that what you said was contemptuous. And I recognize that I've enabled patterns that made contempt possible. That's quite a framework. It's the only framework that leads anywhere productive. We can keep pointing fingers at each other, or we can try to understand how we got here together. She was quiet for a long moment, considering. You think I hold you in contempt? I think what you said revealed contempt that had been building for a long time. Contempt doesn't appear overnight. It accumulates. The question is whether we address it or pretend it doesn't exist. And if I don't see it the same way you do, then we probably need professional help to bridge the gap in perception. You mean couples therapy? I mean something. Because what we're doing now, this Cold War, this parallel existence, isn't sustainable. Not for us, not for Iris, not for anyone. The suggestion of therapy seemed to land differently than previous attempts at conversation. Perhaps because I had framed it as a mutual effort rather than an accusation. Or perhaps because Margot was also recognizing that our current situation couldn't continue. I'm willing to try therapy, she said finally, if you think it would help. I don't know if it would help, but I know that not trying guarantees we stay stuck. Fine. Find someone, and I'll go. It wasn't an apology. It wasn't an acknowledgement of wrongdoing. But it was movement. The first genuine movement since that devastating evening 3 weeks ago. I took it as progress, even if progress felt like too generous a word for such a small step. Dr. Margaret Hollander came recommended by Dr. Walsh, who had provided several referrals for couples therapists in the Phoenix area. Her office was in a professional building near Camelback Mountain, the view from her windows offering a perspective on the desert that felt appropriately vast for the work we were undertaking. Our first session was awkward, as first sessions tend to be. Margot and I sat on opposite ends of a couch that seemed designed to accommodate exactly this arrangement, close enough to suggest partnership, far enough apart to acknowledge distance. Tell me what brings you here, Dr. Hollander said. Margot looked at me, clearly expecting me to speak first. I obliged. 3 weeks ago my wife said something to me that I found deeply hurtful. We've been unable to resolve it on our own, and I suggested we try therapy. What did she say? I repeated Margot's words, feeling their weight again as I spoke them aloud. She told me that if I was so independent, I should be intimate with my own hand. Dr. Hollander's expression remained neutral, but I saw her make a note. Margot, is that accurate? Did you say that? I said something like that, yes. I was frustrated. Sullivan had been pressuring me about our intimate life, and I lashed out. Can you say more about what you mean by pressuring? He's always tracking how long it's been since we were intimate. I can feel him keeping score, waiting for an opportunity to bring it up. It makes me feel like a vending machine, like I'm supposed to dispense on demand. And Sullivan, how do you experience what Margot describes as pressure? I experience it as attempting to maintain connection in my marriage. The intimacy isn't about sex itself. It's about feeling wanted, valued, close to my partner. When I bring it up, I'm not pressuring. I'm trying to address a gap that's growing between us. So, we have two different interpretations of the same behavior, Dr. Hollander observed. Margot experiences Sullivan's interest in intimacy as pressure. Sullivan experiences his own interest as an attempt at connection. Neither interpretation is necessarily wrong. They're simply different. But one interpretation led to a statement that was designed to humiliate, I said. That's what I can't get past. Let's explore that. Margot, when you said what you said, what was your intention? Margot was quiet for. I wanted him to stop, to understand that I couldn't handle one more demand on my time and energy. I wanted space. And did you intend to hurt him? I was so frustrated that I didn't think about how it would land. I just wanted relief from the pressure I was. So your intention was to create distance, not necessarily to wound. Yes, but I can see now that it did wound. This was the first time Margot had acknowledged, even indirectly, that her words had caused harm. Dr. Hollander noted the shift and built on it. Sullivan, what do you hear in what Margot just said? I hear that she was focused on her own needs and wasn't thinking about the impact on, which honestly has been a pattern in our marriage for a long time. What pattern do you mean? The pattern where her needs are addressed and mine are dismissed, where her stress justifies any behavior, while my stress is just something I need to manage. That's not fair, Margot interjected. I've made sacrifices too. I'm not saying you haven't. I'm saying the sacrifices have been unequal, and the recognition has been unequal too. Dr. Hollander held up a hand, interrupting the back and forth. We're going to have plenty of time to explore these patterns. For today, I want to establish a foundation. Both of you are, which means both of you want something to change. That's significant. I want my wife to respect me, I said. Not just love me, respect me. And Margot, what do you want? I want to feel like I'm enough, like I don't have to perform to be acceptable. Those desires aren't necessarily incompatible, Dr. Hollander. Sullivan wants respect. Margot wants acceptance. The question is whether you can give each other what you need without depleting yourselves. The session continued, establishing ground rules and beginning to map the territory of our conflict. By the end, I felt something I hadn't felt in weeks, a tentative hope that understanding might be possible, even if resolution remained uncertain. Walking to our cars afterward, Margot spoke for the first time since we had left the office. That was harder than I expected. Therapy usually is. I didn't realize. I knew you were hurt, but hearing you describe the pattern, the imbalance, I didn't realize how much I had been taking without giving. Is that something you can acknowledge? Really acknowledge? Not just in the moment? I'm trying to. It's not easy to see yourself through someone else's eyes. I know. I'm trying to see myself through yours too. To understand how my attempts at connection felt like pressure to you. Maybe that's what therapy will help with. Understanding each other better. Maybe. We parted ways at our cars, driving home separately as had become our habit. But something felt different, less hostile, more open to possibility. The ice hadn't thawed, but it had cracked in places that might eventually allow warmth to. The couple's therapy continued weekly, each session peeling back another layer of the accumulated dysfunction that had brought us to crisis. Dr. Hollander was skilled at identifying patterns we couldn't see ourselves, at reframing conflicts in ways that illuminated rather than inflamed. Let's talk about how you handle conflict, she said during our fourth session. When you disagree about something small, not a major issue, what happens? Margot answered first. Usually I express what I think. Sullivan expresses what he thinks, and then we compromise, I suppose. Sullivan, do you experience it that way? Not exactly. What usually happens is Margot expresses what she thinks firmly. I express what I think tentative, and then we do what she wants while calling it compromise. That's not true, Margot protested. Give me an example where it went differently. Margot opened her mouth and closed it. The silence stretched. This is what I mean by pattern, Dr. Hollander said gently. They're often invisible to the person benefiting. Margot, it's not that you're deliberately dominating decisions. It's that the dynamic has evolved to favor your preferences, and Sullivan has adapted by making his preferences smaller. But why would he do that? Because the alternative was conflict. And Sullivan, like many people, learned to avoid conflict by reducing his own presence in the relationship. I didn't realize I was doing that. It felt like being flexible, being easygoing. It can be both. Flexibility becomes problematic when it's always one-directional, when one person is always the one bending. The session opened a vein of exploration that continued over the following weeks. We examined how decisions got made in our household, how responsibilities had been distributed, how our individual needs were expressed and addressed, or not. The picture that emerged was troubling, but not surprising. A marriage where the balance had shifted so gradually that neither of us had noticed until it became extreme. Margot had assumed more decision-making authority. I had assumed more practical responsibility. She decided what we did. I made sure it happened. She set priorities. I executed. How did we end up here? Margot asked during one session, genuinely bewildered. I never wanted to dominate the marriage. You didn't dominate, you filled vacuums. When Sullivan didn't assert preferences, you asserted yours. It felt like leadership, not dominance. And Sullivan, when you stopped asserting preferences, what were you experiencing? Exhaustion, mostly. Fighting to be heard felt like too much work. Margot's preferences were usually reasonable, and I didn't have strong feelings about most things anyway. It was easier to go along. But the things you did have strong feelings about, like intimacy, those got steamrolled too. Yes, because by then the pattern was set. My opinions didn't carry weight, even on things that mattered to me. And that's where the contempt came from, Dr. Hollander observed. Margot, when you said what you said about being intimate with his own hand, you were speaking from a position where Sullivan's needs had become invisible to you, not deliberately, just through years of them being minimized. The recognition hit Margot visibly. I watched her face as she absorbed the implication, that her cruel words weren't an aberration, but a symptom of a much longer process. I'm so sorry, she said, and for the first time, The apology sounded genuine rather than defensive. I didn't see what I was doing, what we were doing together. Acknowledging it is the first step, Dr. Hollander said. The question now is what you want to do about it. I want to fix it, but I don't know how. That's what we're here for, to figure out the how. The sessions became more productive after that, less about assigning blame and more about rebuilding. We learned communication techniques that felt artificial but gradually became more natural. We practiced expressing needs directly, rather than hinting or assuming. We established check-ins where both of us could voice concern before they accumulated into resentment. But the progress was fragile. Outside of therapy, the warmth we generated in Dr. Hollander's office often dissipated in the face of daily life. Old patterns reasserted themselves. New habits required constant maintenance. This is harder than I thought it would be, I told Dr. Walsh during one of my individual sessions. What did you think it would be? I don't know. I thought if we understood the problem, the solution would be obvious. But understanding and changing are different things. They are. Understanding is intellectual. Changing is behavioral, emotional, habitual. It requires sustained effort over time. Do you think it's possible? For Margot and me to actually rebuild? Possible, yes. Guaranteed, no. It depends on whether both of you are willing to sustain the effort required, and whether the damage that's been done can be repaired, or whether it's too fundamental. How do I know which it is? You probably don't know yet. These things reveal themselves over time, through the process of trying. I left that session feeling the particular uncertainty that had become my constant companion. Hope and doubt intertwined, progress and setbacks alternating. The future of my marriage hanging in a balance that I couldn't tip through will alone. Just when I thought we were making progress, Thanksgiving arrived to test everything we had built. The holiday had always been complicated. Margot's family lived in San Diego and expected us to visit. My mother, widowed and living alone in Tucson, expected us to include her in any celebration. The logistical challenge of satisfying both had been a source of tension for years, usually resolved by my accommodation. We went to San Diego for Thanksgiving and had my mother visit for Christmas, but this year felt different. I wanted to see my mother. I wanted Iris to spend time with her grandmother. And for the first time in many years, I wanted to assert a preference rather than automatically deferring. I think we should do Thanksgiving in Tucson this year, I said, bringing up the topic one evening in early November. Margot's expression shifted immediately. We always go to San Diego for Thanksgiving. I know, but my mother is getting older, and she's been alone since Dad died. I'd like to spend the holiday with her this year. What about my family? They're expecting us. They can expect us at Christmas, or they can come here. There are options that don't require us to always do what they want. The word always was pointed, and Margot caught it. Is this about Thanksgiving, or is this about the patterns we've been discussing in therapy? It's about both. I'm trying to assert my preferences instead of automatically accommodate. Isn't that what we've been working on? Yes, but not by ambushing me with major holiday changes 6 weeks before Thanksgiving. Bringing up a topic for discussion isn't ambush. Ambushing would be buying plane tickets without consulting you. The conversation escalated, cycling through familiar patterns even as both of us recognized what we were doing. Margot pushed for the status quo. I pushed for change. She framed her preference as reasonable. I framed mine as valid. Neither of us was willing to simply concede. This is exactly the dynamic we talked about in therapy, I said, trying to step back from the content to observe the process. You're assuming your preference should win, and I'm supposed to accommodate. That's not what I'm doing. I'm pointing out that changing long-standing plans has consequences. Plans you made without consulting me. Plans that became long-standing because I never pushed back. Are you really going to relitigate every decision in our marriage? I'm trying to make this decision differently than we've made decisions before. If our patterns need to change, this is what change looks like. The argument didn't resolve that evening, or the next day, or the day after that. We brought it to therapy, where Dr. Hollander helped us examine what was actually at stake beyond the logistical question. Margot, what does it mean to you if you don't spend Thanksgiving with your family? It feels like failing, like choosing Sullivan over. And Sullivan, what does it mean to you to spend Thanksgiving with your mother? It means my preferences matter, that I'm not automatically the one who gives in. So, the holiday is a proxy for larger belonging versus respect, tradition versus change. Neither of you is wrong for wanting what you want. Then how do we resolve it? Margot asked. By recognizing that this year, compromise might not mean a middle ground. It might mean one person's preference wins, with the explicit understanding that the next decision will honor the other person's needs. So we take turns? Something like that. The question is, who goes first? The silence that followed was charged with everything we'd been working. Finally Margot spoke. We'll go to Tucson. Sullivan is right. His mother is aging, and we haven't prioritized that. 1 year of doing things differently won't destroy my family connections. The concession felt significant, not because Thanksgiving in Tucson was inherently important, but because Margot had chosen to yield when she could have fought. It was a demonstration that the patterns could change, that the therapy was working, that my needs could be honored without the marriage collapsing. "Thank you," I said. "That means a lot. It's what we're supposed to be doing, right? Taking turns, considering each other's needs?" "It is. And I'll remember this when the next decision comes." The therapy session ended on a note of cautious optimism, but the argument itself had revealed how fragile our progress was, how easily we could fall back into old dynamics when stress or stakes increased. Changing patterns wasn't a one-time decision. It was a daily, hourly, moment-by-moment choice to behave differently than habit dictated. I wondered if we had the endurance for that kind of sustained effort. I wondered if the marriage was worth it. The drive to Tucson took 2 hours, the Arizona landscape shifting from the sprawl of Phoenix to the more open terrain of the southern desert. Iris sat in the back seat, absorbed in her phone, while Margot and I maintained the careful politeness that had characterized our interactions since the argument about holiday plans. My mother's house was a modest ranch-style home in a neighborhood that had aged alongside its residents. She had lived there for 30 years, had raised me in those rooms, had buried my father from those. The place held memories that accumulated with each visit, layers of history visible in the wear on the doorframes and the fading of the paint. "Sullivan!" My mother embraced me at the door, her grip stronger than her slight frame suggested. "And Margot, Iris, come in, come in." The welcome was warm and genuine. Whatever tensions existed between Margot and my mother, and there were some, the inevitable friction between a wife and a mother-in-law, who both loved the same man, they were set aside for the holiday. The day proceeded with the rhythms that Thanksgiving demand: cooking, setting tables, the particular dance of multiple people in a kitchen not designed for crowds. My mother had prepared most of the meal in advance, but Margot contributed side dishes she had brought from Phoenix, and Iris helped with whatever tasks were assigned. "She seems different," my mother said quietly, and we found ourselves alone in the living room. "Margot, softer somehow. We've been going through some things, working on our marriage." I gathered. "You seemed strained the last time you visited." She looked at me with the perception that mothers never lose. "Are you okay?" "I'm managing. It's been difficult, but I think we're making progress." "And Iris?" "She knows we've been struggling. She's handling it with more maturity than I expected. She's a good girl. Gets that from you." I smiled, appreciating the maternal bias, even as I recognized she gets it from both of us. Margot has her strengths, whatever else is true. I never said otherwise. Dinner was pleasant. The 4 of us gathered around a table that had seen countless family. The conversation flowed easily. Iris's school activities, my mother's neighborhood news, the safe topics that families discuss when deeper waters feel too risky. After the meal, while Margot and my mother cleaned up, my mother's insistence, I walked with Iris through the backyard, looking at stars that were more visible here than in the light-polluted Phoenix sky. "This is nice," Iris said. "I'm glad we came." "So am I. Grandma seems happy to have us here." "She is. She doesn't see enough of you." "Is that why you wanted to come? Because you felt bad for her?" "Partly, but also because I wanted to assert something, to show your mother that my preferences matter too." Iris was quiet for "Is that what you've been fighting about? Your preferences?" "In a way. Our marriage has been unbalanced for a long time, with your mom's needs taking priority over mine. We're trying to fix that by coming to Tucson instead of San Diego. That's one small piece. The bigger picture is about respect, about being partners rather than one person always deferring to the other." "That sounds hard." "It is hard, but some things are worth the difficulty." We stood in silence, looking up at the infinite sky, the weight of family dynamics temporarily set aside in favor of something larger. I felt connected to Iris in that moment, to her perception, her understanding, her quiet support of whatever I was navigating. "I hope it works out," she said finally, "for you and Mom. But if it doesn't, I meant what I said before. I'll be okay. I know you will. You're resilient. You get that from your grandmother. And from you." The compliment warmed me more than I could express. We returned inside, rejoining the family tableau that, for this one day at least, felt like what it was supposed to be. That night, lying in the guest room of my childhood home, I felt something shift. The holiday had been good, genuinely, not just tolerable. Margot had participated willingly, had set aside her preference gracefully, had interacted with my mother with more warmth than usual. Maybe the patterns really were changing. Maybe the work we were doing was taking root. Or maybe this was just a pause, a moment of peace before the next challenge tested everything we had built. December arrived with its usual demand: gift shopping, work deadlines, the social obligations that accumulate as the year ends. Margot's family had accepted the change in Thanksgiving plans with minimal complaint, partly because we had committed to visiting for Christmas, and partly because Margot had apparently explained some of what we were working through in therapy. But Christmas itself proved more complicated than Thanksgiving had. Margot's sister Diane arrived from San Diego a few days before the holiday, planning to stay with us before we all drove to their parents' house. I had always found Diane difficult. She shared Margot's assertive nature, but without Margot's professional polish, and she had never particularly liked me. "So you're the reason we had a turkey-free Thanksgiving," she said, within an hour of her arrival. The comment disguised as a joke, but carrying clear judgment. "We spent Thanksgiving with Sullivan's mother," Margot said, her voice carrying a warning that Diane chose to ignore. Breaking a 12-year tradition must have been quite a campaign. It was a mutual decision. Margot's response was sharper now. "Sullivan's preferences matter too. Of course they do." Diane's smile was condescending. "I'm just surprised they suddenly started mattering after all these years." The tension escalated over the following days, Diane's presence amplifying every stress point in our household. She made comments about my work, about my contribution to the household, about the food I cooked when it was my turn to prepare meals. Each jab was subtle enough to deny, but pointed enough to. "Your sister is making this very difficult," I told Margot, after one particularly tense evening. "I know. I've talked to her. Clearly it didn't help. She's protective of me. She saw how things were before we started therapy, and she thinks you're the villain." "The villain? I'm the one who was told to satisfy myself because my needs don't matter." "I know. But she only knows her version of the story. The version where you pressured me, where I was overwhelmed, where you finally backed off because I pushed back. That's not what happened. I know it's not. But that's what she believes, and I can't undo years of her perception in one conversation." The situation came to a head on Christmas Eve. We were preparing to drive to San Diego, bags packed and car loaded, when Diane made one comment too many. "It's nice that you're joining us, Sullivan. I know how hard it must be to participate in family events that aren't centered on—" "Diane," Margot's voice was sharp. "Stop. I'm just saying, you're just being cruel, which is exactly what you've been since you arrived. Sullivan has been nothing but accommodating, and you've treated him like an inconvenience." "I'm defending you, Margot. Someone has to. I don't need defending for my own husband. What I need is for my sister to respect my choices and my marriage." The confrontation was surprising. Margot standing up for me, against her own family, in a way I had rarely witnessed. Diane looked stunned, unaccustomed to being challenged. "If that's how you feel," Diane said stiffly, "it is. And if you can't treat Sullivan with basic respect, you can drive yourself to San Diego, and we'll meet you there." The silence that followed was charged with family dynamics too deep for outsiders to fully understand. Finally, Diane backed down, not apologizing exactly, but modulating her behavior enough to make the car ride bearable. Later, in the privacy of our bedroom, I thanked Margot for defending me. "You shouldn't have to thank me for that," she said. "Defending my husband should be automatic. It hasn't been. Not always. I know. That's part of what I'm working on, seeing you as my partner, my team, rather than someone I need to manage or defend myself." "Diane's version of events? Is that what you told her about our marriage? That I was pressuring you?" Margot was quiet for a moment. "I told her what felt true at the time. Before therapy, before I understood the patterns we had created together. I painted you as the problem because it was easier than examining my own contributions. And now? Now, I see it differently. But I can't undo what Diane heard, what shaped her perception of you. That's something I'll have to address over time. Will you? Or will she always see me as the villain in your story? I'll try. I can't guarantee how she'll respond, but I can try to correct the narrative I contributed to." The honesty was painful but necessary. Margot had told her family a version of events that positioned me as the antagonist, and those perceptions wouldn't dissolve quickly. But her willingness to acknowledge the problem, to take responsibility for correcting it, felt like progress. We drove to San Diego the next morning, the holiday resuming its expected rhythms. But something had shifted in our dynamic. Margot had chosen me over her family's comfort, had defended me publicly, had demonstrated that the work we were doing was taking root. January brought reflection and resolution, the arbitrary marker of a new year, providing an occasion to assess where we stood. Our marriage had improved. That much was undeniable. The therapy was helping. The patterns were shifting. The contempt that had surfaced in Margot's cruel words was being replaced by something more respectful. We were communicating better, fighting less destructively, creating space for both of our needs, rather than prioritizing one set over the other. But I was still sleeping in the guest room. The intimacy question, the original source of the crisis, remained largely unaddressed. We had discussed it in therapy, had acknowledged its importance, had made commitments to working on reconnecting physically as well as emotionally. But the actual reconnection hadn't happened. "I want to talk about something," I said one evening, finding Margot in the living room with her laptop. "What's that?" "We've been doing good work in therapy. Our communication has improved. Our dynamics are healthier. But there's one area we haven't addressed directly. Intimacy." "Yes." Margot closed her laptop, giving me her full attention. "I've been thinking about that too. And I'm scared. What I said to you, those words, they came from somewhere real. Not contempt for you exactly, but exhaustion with the expectation that I should want something I didn't feel capable of wanting. Now I understand the patterns better. I understand how the imbalance in our relationship affected everything, including how I felt about intimacy. But understanding doesn't automatically translate into desire. I'm not asking for performance. I never wanted performance. I wanted connection, genuine, mutual connection. I know, and I want that. But I'm not sure how to get from where I am to where you need me to be. The honesty was difficult but valuable. Margot wasn't refusing to address the intimacy issue. She was acknowledging its complexity, the layers of dysfunction that had accumulated around something that should have been simple and natural. What if we started small? I suggested. Not sex, not the pressure of full intimacy, but something. Physical affection, closeness, the things that might rebuild the foundation for more. Like what? Like me sleeping in our bedroom again. Like holding hands. Like physical proximity without expectation. Like relearning how to be comfortable with each other's bodies. Margot considered the suggestion. I could try that. No expectations, no scorekeeping, just proximity. Just proximity. And if either of us wants more, we communicate. We don't assume or pressure or withdraw. We talk. That sounds manageable. That night, I returned to our bedroom for the first time in 3 months. We lay on our respective sides of the bed, not touching but sharing space. The familiar sounds of each other's breathing filling the darkness. It wasn't intimacy, it wasn't connection, but it was presence. A willingness to be near each other, to trust that proximity was safe. From that small beginning, we began to rebuild. The months that followed were a gradual process of reconstruction, each week bringing small advances and occasional retreats. The intimacy returned slowly, first through simple touches, then through more deliberate affection, eventually through the physical connection that had been absent for so long. But what struck me most was how different it felt from before. In our previous relationship, intimacy had often felt like a transaction, something I sought and Margot provided, with varying degrees of willingness. Now it felt more mutual, more organic, more connected to our emotional bond rather than separate from it. This is what it's supposed to feel like, I told Dr. Walsh during one of my individual sessions. Intimacy as an expression of connection, not a substitute. What makes the difference? Respect, I think. Before, I was always slightly apologetic about wanting intimacy, like I was asking for something I didn't deserve. Now I feel entitled to want what I want, and Margot feels entitled to want what she wants. And we negotiate from positions of equality, rather than hierarchy. That's significant growth. It is. I didn't realize how much our intimacy problems were symptoms of larger dysfunction. I thought the issue was sex. It was actually about power and respect, and being seen as a full partner. The changes extended beyond the bedroom. Our daily interactions had shifted, the balance between us recalibrating to something healthier. Decisions were made jointly, rather than defaulting to Margot's preferences. My opinions were solicited and valued rather than tolerated and dismissed. You seem happier, Iris observed one afternoon. We were driving home from her soccer practice, the Phoenix traffic demanding the particular patience that Arizona drivers develop. Both of you, less tense. We're working on things. It's slow, but it's happening. Is the therapy helping? Very much. Having someone outside the marriage help us see patterns we couldn't see ourselves. That's been essential. Maybe I should try therapy, Iris said, half joking. Apparently it solves everything. It doesn't solve everything. It just helps you understand problems well enough to address them. The actual solving is still your responsibility. That sounds like something a therapist would say. Probably because I've been listening to therapists for the past 6 months. Iris laughed, and I felt the particular warmth that comes from connecting with your child, from being seen as a person rather than just a parent. The year progressed, seasons shifting from the mild Phoenix winter into the intense summer heat. Our marriage continued to evolve, the patterns that had nearly destroyed us being replaced by something stronger, more intentional, more aware. I think about those words sometimes, Margot admitted one evening. We were on the patio, enjoying the brief window of pleasant temperature before the summer nights became too hot, even for outdoor lingering. What I said to you, be intimate with your own hand. So do I. Does it still hurt? Less than it did. The sting has faded, but the memory remains. I don't think I'll ever fully forget how that felt. I wouldn't want you to, not because I want you to hold a grudge, but because remembering keeps us honest. Keeps us from sliding back into the patterns that made those words possible. That's a healthy way to look at it. I learned it in therapy. She smiled, and I saw the woman I had married, not the frustrated, contemptuous stranger who had emerged during our crisis, but the partner I had always believed existed beneath the accumulated dysfunction. I'm glad we didn't give up, I said. So am I. There were moments when it would have been easier to walk away, to accept that we had damaged each other too much to repair, but something kept us trying. What was it, for you? You. Watching you refuse to accept being treated with contempt, Watching you insist on respect even when it would have been easier to capitulate, it reminded me why I married you. You're stronger than you let yourself be, Sullivan. Stronger than I let you be. I didn't feel strong. I felt lost. Maybe that's what strength looks like sometimes. Feeling lost, but still moving forward. Our 17th wedding anniversary arrived in August. The milestone carrying weight that previous anniversaries hadn't borne. This year, the anniversary represented something beyond the mere passage of time. It represented survival, transformation, the decision to rebuild rather than abandon. I made a reservation, I said, surprising Margot with the initiative. That restaurant in Sedona we've always talked about trying. The one with the view of Cathedral Rock? That's the one. I thought we could make a weekend of it. Iris is staying with friends. We could have 2 days just for us. That sounds wonderful. The drive to Sedona was familiar. The highway winding through Verde Valley before climbing into the red rock country that made this part of Arizona famous. We talked easily, the conversation flowing in ways that had once been typical but had become rare during our difficult years. The restaurant exceeded expectations, the view of Cathedral Rock at sunset providing a backdrop that seemed designed for significance. We ordered wine, perused menus, existed in the particular intimacy that shared meals in beautiful settings. I want to say something, Margot said, her voice carrying a formality that suggested she had something I should have said a long time ago. I'm listening. When I said those words to you, about being intimate with your own hand, I was trying to hurt you. I knew exactly how damaging it would be, and I said it anyway. That wasn't frustration or exhaustion, it was cruelty. Deliberate, calculated. I know. I've apologized before, but I don't think I've ever fully acknowledged. The therapy helped me understand the patterns, but it also gave me ways to excuse my behavior, the imbalance, the accumulation, the contextual factors. All of that was real, but it doesn't explain the choice to say something designed to devastate. Why are you telling me this now? Because I want our rebuilding to be built on complete honesty. If we're going to have another 17 years, and I want us to, they need to start from truth rather than comfortable narrative. The admission was more vulnerable than anything Margot had said before. Not just acknowledging the damage, but claiming the intention behind the deliberate choice to wound. Thank you for telling me that, I said. It helps somehow, knowing that you see what happened clearly, without the excuses. I see it, and I see how easily I could have destroyed us with that choice. If you had left, if you had accepted my contempt as final, I would have lost everything worth having. I almost did leave. There were moments when walking away seemed like the only option. What stopped you? Hope, or maybe stubbornness. I wasn't willing to let one terrible moment define our entire marriage, even though it revealed things needed to change. I'm grateful for that stubbornness. I'm grateful you saw something worth saving, even when I was doing my best to convince you otherwise. The meal continued, the conversation shifting to lighter topics as the intensity of Margot's confession settled. But something had been established, a new foundation, more honest than what had come before, capable of supporting whatever we built next. Later, in our hotel room overlooking the red rocks, we were intimate in ways that felt both familiar and new. The connection I had sought for years was present, not as performance or obligation, but as genuine expression of the partnership we were rebuilding. I love you, Margot said afterward, the words carrying weight they hadn't carried in years, not just as habit or history, but actively, intentionally. I choose to love you. I love you too. And I choose you, not despite what we've been through, but because of it. We know what we're capable of surviving now. That's not nothing. The second year of our rebuilding brought a deepening of what the first year had established. The patterns continued to shift, the balance continued to improve. We weren't perfect, no marriage is, but we were functional in ways that had seemed impossible 18 months earlier. Dr. Hollander transitioned us from weekly sessions to monthly check-in, confident that we had developed the tools to navigate challenges independently. The graduation felt significant, proof that our work had taken root, that we weren't dependent on external guidance to maintain what we had built. You've done remarkable work, she told us during one of our final regular sessions. When you came to me, you were in crisis. Contempt had surfaced. Patterns were entrenched. The possibility of divorce was real. Now you've rebuilt something healthier than what you had before the crisis began. It doesn't feel remarkable from the inside, Margot said. It feels like constant effort, daily choices, not taking the easy path. That's exactly what remarkable looks like. The easy path would have been to separate, to blame each other, to tell everyone that the marriage failed because the other person was impossible. Instead, you did the hard work of changing yourselves and your... Sullivan did most of the... Margot. He was the one who demanded change, who insisted on therapy, who refused to accept being treated with contempt. You both contributed. Sullivan catalyzed the change, but you embraced it, Mark. You examined your behavior, acknowledged your role, committed to being different. That's not nothing. The balance of credit wasn't important. What mattered was that we had arrived at a place where credit could be shared, where both of us felt invested in the outcome, rather than victimized by the process. My individual therapy with Dr. Walsh also began to wind down, the work of self-examination having accomplished what it needed to accomplish. "You've grown significantly," she observed during one of our final sessions. "The person who walked into my office 18 months ago was uncertain about his worth, accommodating to a fault, unclear about what he needed or deserved. The person sitting here now is different." "How so?" "You know your value. You assert your needs. You've learned to balance accommodation with self-respect. Those are significant shifts. I couldn't have made them without help. Help facilitates. But you did the work. Don't diminish that." I carried her words with me, the validation feeling earned rather than gratuitous. I had done work, hard, uncomfortable, transformative work, and it had produced results that would shape the rest of my life. Iris noticed the changes too, commenting on how different her parents seemed compared to the tense, distant couple she had observed during the crisis. "You laugh together now," she said one evening. "You used to just coexist. Now you actually seem to like each other. We do like each other. We just lost track of that. I'm glad you found it again." My friend Amanda's parents got divorced last year, and she said the worst part wasn't the separation. It was the years before when they were together but obviously miserable. At least now she knows her parents are happier. We're working toward happiness. I think we're getting there. You seem like you're where happy couples are supposed to be. The assessment from a 16-year-old felt more validating than any therapist's pronouncement. Iris had watched us at our worst and was now watching us at our best. Her perception that we were happy meant we were projecting something genuine rather than performing normalcy. 2 years after Margot had told me to be intimate with my own hand, I stood in our kitchen on a Saturday morning, making breakfast while she reviewed work emails at the table. The scene was domestic, ordinary, exactly the kind of moment that constitutes the bulk of married life. But the ordinariness felt different. It felt earned rather than default, chosen rather than automatic. Every morning we woke up together, every meal we shared, every quiet evening on the patio. All of it was the result of decisions we had made to repair what had been broken. "What are you thinking about?" Margot asked, looking up from her laptop. "How different this feels from 2 years ago." "Different how?" "Like we're choosing this life rather than just living it. Like every day is a decision to stay rather than an assumption that there's no alternative." "Is that tiring? All that choosing?" "Sometimes, but it's also liberating. When you choose something, you own it. It's yours in a way that inherited patterns never are." "I think about that too," Margot had, "about how we almost lost this without ever realizing what we were losing. The years before the crisis, we were going through the motions, assuming the marriage would survive on inertia. We were wrong. We were, but we caught it in time. Barely. Barely is still catching it." Iris wandered into the kitchen, drawn by the smell of bacon. At 16, she had grown into someone I genuinely enjoyed spending time with. Thoughtful, perceptive, funny, in ways that surprised me. "Breakfast?" she asked hopefully. "In 10 minutes. She poured herself orange juice and sat beside her mother, the three of us occupying the kitchen space with the comfortable familiarity that healthy families develop. "I've been thinking," Iris said, "about what happened, guys. The crisis, the therapy, the rebuilding. What about it? I think it was good. Not the crisis itself. Obviously that was painful to watch. But what came out of it? You're better partners now than you were before. You actually talk to each other, listen to each other, treat each other like equal. We try. That's what I mean. Before you didn't try. Or at least not both of you. Dad was trying to connect, and Mom was trying to now you're both trying to be present." The observation was astute, cutting to the heart of what had changed. We had shifted from a marriage where one person invested and another managed to a partnership where both parties were fully engaged. "Thank you for noticing that," Margot said, "and thank you for being patient with us while we figured it out. I didn't have much choice. I live here." Iris grinned. "But also, I learned something from watching you. About relationship, about how they break down and how they get repaired. It's probably going to help me in my own relationship someday." "I hope you never need the crisis to learn the lesson," I said. "I hope you can build something healthy from the start. Maybe, but if I can't, I'll know it's possible to fix things. That's something, right? That's something significant." The breakfast was ready, the morning continuing with the rhythms that had become our new normal. We ate together, talked about plans for the day, existed in the particular comfort that comes from knowing you're exactly who you want to be, with exactly the people you want to be with. Later, after Iris had left to meet friends and Margot had retreated to her home office, I sat on the patio with a cup of coffee, watching the Arizona morning unfold. The heat was building, the summer demanding respect from everyone who lived in this unforgiving landscape. I thought about the journey we had traveled, from contempt to crisis to reconstruction, to something resembling contentment. The path had been harder than I ever imagined, requiring courage I didn't know I possessed, revealing truths about myself and my marriage that were painful to confront. But here I was, on the other side of all of it, in a relationship that was healthier than anything I had experienced before. Not because the crisis had been worth it, I wouldn't wish that pain on anyone, but because we had refused to let the crisis be the end of our story. Be intimate with your own hand. The words that had started everything echoed in my memory, their cruelty preserved. Margot had said them, had meant them in that moment, had revealed something ugly about ours that needed to be addressed, and we had addressed it. Through therapy, through honesty, through the daily work of choosing to be better partners than we had been before. The words remained, but their meaning had transformed, from devastation to catalyst, from ending to beginning. I finished my coffee and went inside, where Margot was working and Iris would soon return. The ordinary, extraordinary life we had built together continued to unfold. The hand I had been dealt was the same hand I had started with, but I had learned to play it differently, and that made all the difference.